In this video, we're going to learn all about how to write data to an external file. Let's get on with it. We're going to look at some different ways to write data to files, depending on whether it's a string, a list, or even a dictionary that you're trying to write. If you haven't already watched my video on reading data from files, it's probably a good idea to watch that first. I'm going to start with the open function. And what I'm going to do is attempt to open a file called hello.txt. Now, if you look at my file list on the left there, you can see that at the moment, that file does not exist. And the reason why I'm doing this without the file already there is to show you that when you try and open a file in write mode by putting "w" in quotes, Python will actually create the file if it doesn't already exist. And just as before, I need to store that file that I'm opening. Now when I run this, Python will attempt to open the file, realize it's not there, and create it. So now we have hello.txt. Let's go ahead and write something to that file. File.write. And in the brackets, I need to put the string that I want to write to the file. Now it is worth noting that you can only write strings to files using file.write. And also, you need to be aware that you have to close the file in order to sort of finish the writing process. If I run that now, the program executes, I go to hello.txt, and you can see it now contains that string, hello world. If I was to try and write an integer value instead, and run this again, you can see that we now get an error saying, write argument must be a string, not an integer. You can only write strings. So if I did have an integer, 1, 2, 3, what I'd need to do is convert it to a string using the string method like this. So now that's going to write the string of the integer 1, 2, 3. Run it again, and it's quite happy. 1, 2, 3. And really that's all there is to it. Open the file, use file.write, and then close the file. Very straightforward. But things get more complicated when we start looking at lists and dictionaries. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm actually going to create a new file, which I'm going to call vehicles.txt. And inside this text file, I'm going to go ahead and just paste in some vehicles. Back to our Python file. Now let's look at an example where we read the list from that vehicles.txt file, do some stuff with it, and save that data back to the file. So let's start by saying file equals open, vehicles.txt, and I'm doing this in read mode. I'm just going to read the information to start with. And if you watched my video on reading from files, in that video I talk about how to take a text file like this, where you have a list separated by new lines, and turn that into a working list. The technique for doing that looks like this. Let's create a variable called vehicles. This is going to contain our list. And what I'm going to do is say file.read. That's going to extract a string from the file, dot splitlines, which is then going to look at that string, look at the new line characters, and use that to split it up and create a list. And I'm done with the file here, so let's go ahead and close it. And I'm just going to print vehicles, just to show that that has worked. So I've now got a Python list from that file. Let's go ahead and do something with that list. This is exactly the kind of thing that you might need to do in your program. Read a list from a file, work with that list, and then save it back again. To start with, I'm going to say vehicles.remove. So this is how you remove something from a list, and I'm going to remove the van from the list. I'm then going to add an item to the list. So let's say vehicles.append, and we'll add a boat. Let's print vehicles, just to confirm that that has worked. And now we can see that van has been removed and boat has been added. Now let's go ahead and save that list back to a file. I could save it over the top of vehicles.txt, but so that we can see the before and after, what I'm going to do is save this to a different file. So file equals open. Let's go for vehicles2.txt in write mode this time. Now, in order to write the list to the file, I can't just do file.write vehicles, because vehicles is a list and I can only write strings. So in fact, what we need to do is loop through our list, writing each individual item to the file. So that looks like this. For every vehicle, in vehicles, file.write vehicle. Now this isn't going to do exactly what we want, but I'm going to close the file at this point so that you can see what this does. Let's go ahead and run that. You can see it's created vehicles2.txt. Let's have a look in there, and we can see that what it's done is loop through the list, and it has added each item directly after the previous one. So we end up with all the items, but just in one long string. We need to make sure that each time we write an item from the list, we then put a new line, so that we end up with line breaks in our text file. So what we can do, after writing each vehicle, we could also do file.write a new line character. So let's run that again. Have a look at vehicles2.txt, and now you can see that after each item, we've got a new line. The problem is, our list has actually got this empty line at the end. Let's have a look at how we can tweak our code so that it doesn't add the new line character for the very last item. So in order to do this, I'm actually going to change the type of for loop that I use. So I'm now going to say for I in range. And I need this to repeat enough times that it can go through the whole list. So the best way to do that is actually just to check the length of vehicles. And what I need to do each time is file.write. Let's put the name of the list. And then in square brackets, I need this to write the first item, then the second item, then the third item. Remember that I in our for loop is an iterator. It's a counting variable that starts at 0. So if I put I, that's going to write vehicles 0, then vehicles 1, vehicles 2. So now we're back where we were before. We're writing each vehicle in turn to the file. But now what I can do, instead of just putting file.write new line character, I can say if I, so the current iteration, is less than the length of vehicles minus 1. In other words, as long as we're not on the very last item of the list, as long as this isn't the final iteration, what I want to do is file.write new line character. So now the new line character will not be written to the file for the very last item in the list. Backspace so that I'm after the for loop. File.close. Run this again. Have a look at our vehicles2.txt, and you can see that now there is no new line character after the final item in the list. So that covers how to save a string and a list to a file. Now let's talk about saving more complex data to files. So if you want to save a two-dimensional list, for example, you could do something similar to what we've done here, but it would involve two for loops, a for loop inside a for loop, and it can get quite complicated. And if you want to save a dictionary to a file, it's even more complex. So I'm going to show you a different way to deal with saving lists and dictionaries using a module called the JSON module. I'm going to start by importing the module. So JSON actually stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And I don't want to get into that too much. All you really need to know is that JSON allows you to save data like a dictionary in a way that then makes it easy to share between different programs and different programming languages. So after importing the JSON module, what I'm now going to do is add a dictionary to the program. I'm just going to copy and paste one that I've already got. So here you can see I've got a dictionary called scores that contains 4 keys, Joe, Sam, Sarah, and Ben, and associated with each of those keys is a list of test scores. Now, if you wanted to save this data to a file using a technique like the one that we just looked at, so kind of looping through the data and writing the bits individually, this would be quite complicated. But let's have a look at how it would work using JSON. So the basic idea of JSON is that it allows us to take this entire dictionary, complete with braces, quotes, colons, all of that, and basically put a quote at the start and a quote at the end. Turn that whole thing into a string. Let's have a look at how it works. What I'm going to do is create a temporary string that I can then write to the file. Let's have a variable called temp string, a temporary string. And what I'm going to do is use the JSON module, and from that JSON module, I'm going to use a particular method called dump string. It looks like dumps, it's dump string. And all I need to do is pass in the list or the dictionary that I want to convert to a string. So I'm going to put scores in there. That's it. I've now converted that dictionary into a string. Let's go ahead and write it to a file so that we can see what it looks like. So file equals open. Let's call it scores.txt. Make sure we open it in write mode. File.write. And remember, we can only write strings using file.write, but that's fine because I just created one. Temp string. And remember, we have to close the file afterwards. Let's run that. You can see it's created scores.txt, and when we look inside, we've got the entire dictionary. Braces, quotes, colons, all of it, it's all in there. This is probably the easiest way to store a dictionary in a file. Now let's have a look at how we can read that data back from the file and turn it back into a working Python dictionary. So let's continue our code. Let's open the file again. File equals open. Scores.txt. I'm opening it in read mode this time. Remember, that is the default, so I could just leave off that second parameter. Let's use that same variable name, temp string, and I'm going to get that string by reading the file, file.read. I've now got that string again. What I need to do is convert that string, which remember includes the braces, quotes, square brackets, commas, all of that, convert that back into a dictionary. I'm going to have to store that dictionary, so let's have a variable called data, and what I need to do is use my JSON module, and the method we're looking for this time, not dump string, which you use to turn a dictionary or list into a string, we're going to use load string. This is what you use if you want to take a string and turn it back into a list or a dictionary. So let's put temp string in there. So the JSON module is going to have a look in that temp string, and if it finds something that is a correctly formed list or dictionary, it will turn it back into a working list or dictionary. So let's close the file, and let's make sure this has actually worked. I'm going to say print, and I'm not just going to print data, I'm going to be a bit more specific. If this is now a working dictionary again, I should be able to look up specific keys within it. So let's look up Joe. Remember that this data was extracted from the file as a string, converted back into a dictionary. Let's see if it's worked. And there you go, it's printed out the value associated with Joe. So using the JSON module, it's actually quite simple to take a complex data structure like a dictionary and write it to a file. So whether you're working with strings, lists, or dictionaries, now you know a few different ways to write that data to an external file. See you next time.